I am 63 years old, lying on an emergency room gurney with a shattered arm. Through the glass, I watch the son I raised scream that I am the violent one. He snapped my bone, yet he plays the victim. When the officer suggested I forgive him for the sake of family, I gave my only answer: call my lawyer. Do not let them walk out of here with one more thing that belongs to me. My name is Margaret Doyle. I am 63 years old. And right now, the only thing keeping me from screaming is the sheer, cold shock of what my own flesh and blood has done to me. I am lying on a gurney in the emergency room of Redstone City General Hospital, the fluorescent lights above humming with a sound that drills straight into my skull. My left arm is a heavy, throbbing ruin encased in a temporary splint, and I can feel the tight pull of dried blood on my cheek where the skin split open. The air smells of rubbing alcohol and cheap floor cleaner, but under that, I can smell the metallic tang of my own fear. Doctors and nurses blur past the open curtain of my cubicle, but my eyes are locked on the observation window across the hall. Through the glass, I see them, Ethan and Sabrina. They are huddled together in the waiting area, whispering frantically. They look like two cornered rats trying to synchronize their story before the trap snaps shut. My son runs a hand through his hair, a gesture he has used since he was a toddler trying to hide a broken vase. Sabrina is dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue, glancing around to see who is watching her performance. I am not a gentlewoman by nature, but I am not the monster they are painting me to be. I did not attack my daughter-in-law without cause. I pushed her because she lunged at my face with her nails bared, screaming like a banshee. That was defense. But the person who grabbed my arm and twisted it until the bone snapped with a sickening pop was not a stranger. It was the boy I raised on a minimum wage salary. It was the man whose diapers I changed and whose college tuition I paid by scrubbing floors until my knees were raw. A young police officer steps back into my space, flipping open a small notebook. He looks exhausted, like he has seen too many domestic disputes for one shift. Mrs. Doyle. He starts, his voice low. Your son and his wife are telling a very consistent story. Sabrina claims you shoved her into the granite counter in a fit of rage. She says she is. Well, she says she is pregnant, and the fall has put the baby at risk. I almost laugh, but it comes out as a choked cough. Pregnant. Sabrina has been on birth control since the day I met her, vocal about hating the idea of ruining her figure. But she knows exactly which button to press to make me look like a villain. She isn't pregnant, I rasp out, my throat dry as sandpaper. The officer sighs, clearly not believing the old woman with the wild hair and blood on her face. Ethan says you lost control. He says he tried to restrain you to protect his wife. And you fell. He says it was an accident caused by your instability. I look past the officer, straight at Ethan through the glass. He meets my gaze for a second, then looks away, his face hardening into a mask of cold indifference. I have seen that look before. It was not today. It was 5 years ago, the day he looked me dead in the eye and told me, I don't owe you anything. Mum, you did what you were supposed to do. I should have listened to the ice in his voice then. A nurse checks my IV line, her face softened with pity that feels more like an insult. Honey, look, she whispers, leaning in close. He is your son. Maybe you don't want to file a report. It's family. You don't want to ruin his life over a bad night. Do you ruin his life? The irony tastes like bile in my mouth. My right hand, the one that isn't broken, clenches into a fist so tight my nails dig into the palm. Give me my phone, I say. It is not a request. The nurse hesitates, but hands over my shattered screen. My thumb trembles, not from pain, but from a rage that burns hotter than the broken bone. I dial the one number I have memorized, the one person who warned me this would happen. It rings twice. Simone, I say, cutting off her greeting. My voice breaks, and I have to swallow hard to keep the sob down. You were right. You were right about the house, the money, everything. I take a deep, shuddering breath, staring at the ceiling tiles stained with water damage. They are here. I whisper into the receiver. Ethan broke my arm. They are trying to say I'm crazy. Simone, don't let them walk out of that hospital with anything else that belongs to me. I hang up the phone and let my head fall back against the thin pillow. The story the police are writing in their notebooks right now says this started in my kitchen an hour ago. They are wrong. This did not start with a push or a broken bone. If you want to understand how a mother can lie here and plot to put her own son behind bars, you have to go back. You have to go back 40 years to a dust-choked town in New Mexico where I was just a girl who thought love was enough to save anyone. I promise you, I will tell you everything. I will not leave out a single ugly detail. San Verde, New Mexico, was not a place people lived because they wanted to. It was a place where people got stuck. It was a landscape of red dust and rusted mining equipment, where the wind felt like a hairdryer blowing directly into your eyes. I was the oldest girl in a house full of hungry boys, and my childhood ended the day I turned 16. I dropped out of high school not because I was lazy, but because my mother was drowning in bills and I needed to help her keep her head above water. I traded my textbooks for a stained apron at a roadside diner that smelled of burnt grease and desperation. I had a plan back then. I had a coffee tin hidden under my floorboards with $40 in it, saving for a bus ticket to anywhere else. But life has a way of laughing at plans. A mine shaft collapsed on a Tuesday morning, taking my father and my exit strategy with it. I stayed. I worked double shifts. I put my dreams in a box and nailed it shut. Then came Daniel. He was a long-haul trucker with a gentle smile and hands that were rougher than sandpaper. He made me feel like I was something precious, not just a workhorse. We got married, and for a few years, I thought I had escaped the curse of San Verde. Then came the phone call. A drunk driver crossed the center line on Interstate 40. Just like that. I was a widow at 26 with a 5-year-old boy named Ethan and a life insurance check that barely covered the funeral. I packed our bags and moved us to Redstone City. I had no education, no husband, and a son who looked at me with eyes too big for his face. I took a job at Orion Vista Freight as a night shift cleaner. It was brutal work. I spent 8 hours a night scrubbing toilets used by men who made more in an hour than I made in a week. My back ached constantly, and my hands were always raw from the harsh chemicals. But I did not stop. I watched the logistics coordinators. I learned the shipping codes while I emptied their trash cans. It took 15 years of clawing my way up. I went from the woman cleaning the floor to the woman managing the floor. I became the shift manager at the largest distribution hub in the city. I was proud of that. I thought I was building a fortress to protect us. While I was fighting wars on the loading dock, Ethan was growing up in a bubble I created. We lived in a rental apartment in a rough neighborhood, but inside those walls, he lived like a prince. I made a vow to myself that my son would never know the hunger I felt in San Verde. If the other kids at school had the new gaming console, Ethan had it too. even if it meant I ate instant noodles for dinner for 3 months. I remember sleeping on the city bus between shifts, my head banging against the cold window, just so I could wake up and make it to his soccer games. I would stand on the sidelines in my work uniform, holding a cheap camera, cheering louder than the mothers who arrived in luxury SUVs. Ethan got used to the word yes. He wanted piano lessons. I said yes. He wanted to go to the expensive science camp. I said yes. I never let him see the overdue notices or the way I sat at the kitchen table at 3 in the morning, calculating how to stretch $10 into 50. "Mum, everyone else is going to the ski trip," he would say, giving me that pleading look. "Okay. Honey, you will go too," I would answer. I see it clearly now, looking back through the lens of my pain. I thought that was love. I thought sacrifice was the highest form of affection. I was wrong. I was teaching him that the world owed him comfort. I was teaching him that my suffering was just the natural fuel for his happiness. The final nail in the coffin came when he was 18. He got accepted into a prestigious private business school 3 states away. The tuition was astronomical. It was more money than I had ever seen. I should have told him no. I should have told him to go to the state college down the road. Instead, I walked into the bank and signed the papers to mortgage the small house I had finally managed to buy after 20 years of saving. I leveraged my only asset, my only safety net, because I believed this was his ticket out of a working-class life. "This is it, Mom," he told me, holding the acceptance letter. "I am going to make us rich." I believed him. I handed him everything I had, thinking I was investing in his future. I did not know I was simply financing my own destruction. Ethan went off to that prestigious business school, and I stayed behind in Redstone City, eating canned soup for dinner to balance the budget. I expected to see his name on the dean's list. Instead, I saw charges on his supplementary credit card for liquor stores and weekend trips. When I called him, worried about his grades, he would sigh with that exasperated tone he had perfected. "Mom, you don't understand modern business," he would say, his voice thick with sleep at 2 in the afternoon. "I am networking. The real deals happen at parties, not in the classroom. I am building connections for our future." I swallowed it. I swallowed every lie because I wanted to believe my investment was sound. But when he graduated, barely scraping by, the reality check should have hit me. It did not. Ethan bounced from one office job to another, none lasting more than 6 months. It was never his fault. My boss is a micromanager. The environment is toxic. They are just jealous of my potential. He would complain over the phone, and every time, it ended with a request. He needed a better car to look professional for interviews. He needed help with rent because the severance package was delayed. I dipped into my retirement savings. I paid off his student loans because I could not bear the thought of him starting life in debt. I crippled my own future to pave his. Then he met Sabrina. She was a real estate agent for a luxury firm, the kind of woman who looked like she had been born wearing designer heels. She was beautiful, sharp, and had a way of speaking that made you feel lucky just to be in her presence. Ethan met her at an upscale bar I certainly could not afford, and suddenly his ambition shifted. He stopped looking for jobs. I remember the first time I met her. It was at a bistro downtown where a salad cost more than my hourly wage. I extended my hand, and Sabrina took it limply. Her eyes, painted with perfect precision, drifted down to my wrist. She stared at my scratched, $20 drugstore watch for a second too long. It was a calculating look, like she was appraising a piece of furniture to see if it was worth keeping or tossing in the trash. It is so quaint that you still wear analog, she said, her smile tight, under her influence. Ethan decided that a regular paycheck was beneath him. Sabrina filled his head with buzzwords. Ethan is a visionary, Maggie. She told me over wine I paid for. He shouldn't be wasting his brilliance making money for someone else. He needs to be a founder. Crypto. Startups. That is where the real wealth is. I was skeptical, but Ethan was happier than I had seen him in years. He felt important. So when they announced their engagement, I did not protest. They wanted a wedding at Lake Marrow, a resort that catered to celebrities. The cost was astronomical. Mom, please. Ethan begged, looking at me with those big eyes. Sabrina's friends are all high rollers. If we do a backyard wedding, I will be a laughingstock. Do not embarrass me. So I paid. I paid for the imported flowers. I paid for the 5-course meal for 200 guests. I stood in the back of the cathedral, watching my son in a tuxedo that cost $2,000, standing next to a woman who glittered like a diamond. I told myself this was it. If this was the price to see him settled and happy, then I would pay it. I was a mother. That was my job. But the trap was already set. A few months later, they found a house in Silver Mesa Heights. It was a sprawling suburban mansion, far too big for 2 people. We need you to co-sign. Mom, Ethan said, sliding the papers across my kitchen table. Just to boost the credit score. We will pay the mortgage. I swear. Sabrina smiled at me, tapping her manicured fingernails on the document. It is just a formality. Maggie, we are family. I signed. I did not read the fine print closely enough. I did not notice that while my name was on the mortgage, making me liable for the debt, the deed to the house had been drafted differently. The ownership listed Ethan and Sabrina as joint tenants. I was just the guarantor. I had handed them the keys to a kingdom I was paying for, and I did not own a single brick of it. A few years later, Orion Vista went through a massive corporate restructuring, and they offered the older management staff an early retirement package. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to keep me fed. That was when Ethan and Sabrina came to me with open arms and a proposal that sounded like salvation. They suggested I sell my small apartment and move into the guest suite at their sprawling house in Silver Mesa Heights. Mom, you will be so lonely by yourself, Ethan had said, squeezing my hand across the table. Come live with us. You can help with the kids, and we can be a real family again. I agreed. I wanted to be needed. For the first 6 months, it felt like paradise. My grandchildren, Leo and Mia, would run to me when I walked through the door, shouting my name. We ate dinner together every night at the long mahogany table. Sabrina would smile at me over her glass of wine and say, I don't know what we would do without you. Maggie, you are saving us thousands of dollars in nanny fees. But slowly, the air in that pristine house began to change. It started with the invisible rules. I remember making a beef stew one Tuesday, a recipe my mother taught me. Sabrina walked into the kitchen, wrinkling her nose as if she smelled sewage. Maggie, please, she said, waving her hand in front of her face. That smell. It clings to the silk drapes. We have guests coming this weekend. Maybe you could cook something less pungent. Then it was the laundry. I was told not to put my cardigans in the main washing machine because they were too old, and the fibers might ruin Ethan's dress shirts. I was told not to watch my game shows in the living room because it bored the children and lowered the intellectual vibration of the household. I retreated to my room, feeling less like a grandmother and more like a tenant who was behind on rent. The financial requests started as small, emergency favors. The electricity bill spiked during the summer because of the central air conditioning. The roof needed a minor repair. Leo needed private Spanish tutors. It is just a temporary cash flow issue with the startup. Ethan promised me, looking exhausted, "I will pay you back the second we get our Series A funding. I promise." Mum. I paid. I always paid. And while I paid, my role shifted. I became the housekeeper. I scrubbed the marble floors while Sabrina went to Pilates. I picked the kids up from school and listened to them complain about the snacks I packed. Meanwhile, Ethan spent his days in his home office with the door closed. He claimed he was working 18 hours a day. But one afternoon, I walked in without knocking to bring him a sandwich, and I saw the reflection in his glasses. He was not coding or analyzing spreadsheets. He was playing a role-playing game, slaying dragons while I scrubbed his toilet. The atmosphere turned from cold to hostile whenever I mentioned repayment. One evening, after I covered a $400 grocery bill, I gently asked Sabrina when I might see some of that money back. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Oh, Maggie, don't be so transactional. It is ugly. You need to stop with this. Poverty mindset. Money in a family flows where it is needed. It is all ours in the end, isn't it?" The poison trickled down to the children. I heard Leo whispering to his sister one afternoon when I dropped a spoon in the kitchen. "Grandma is so clumsy," he said, rolling his eyes just like his mother. "Mom says she is getting forgetful and messy." They did not respect me. They tolerated me. The breaking point of my denial came yesterday. I was sorting through the mail, looking for a letter from my doctor. When I saw a credit card statement addressed to Ethan, I almost put it aside. But I saw my name listed as the secondary card holder. I had never authorized a card. My hands shook as I tore open the envelope. The balance was over $5,000. There were charges for the Gilded Lounge, a high-end whiskey bar. There were charges for a weekend stay at a luxury spa in Arizona. There were charges for airline tickets. None of these were for groceries or electricity. I sat in the kitchen, the only light coming from the digital clock on the oven. The house was silent, but the silence did not feel peaceful anymore. It felt heavy. I looked at the statement, then at the lease agreement I had signed years ago. And for the first time, the word family tasted like ash in my mouth. I was not a matriarch being cared for in her twilight years. I was a resource being mined until the vein ran dry. And I realized with a terrifying clarity that they would not stop digging until I was empty. The dinner conversations in the house changed texture. They were no longer about the children's grades or Ethan's imaginary business ventures. They became singular, focused, and predatory. Ethan and Sabrina began to speak constantly about what they called my legacy plan. They framed it as a burden they wanted to lift from my shoulders. "Mum, it is just so much paperwork for you to handle alone," Ethan said one evening, pouring me a glass of water I had not asked for. "We should transfer the title of your old rental property and the remaining savings into my name. Just for safekeeping. You know, in case something happens to you." The air in the room felt thin. I watched Sabrina reach into her designer tote bag and pull out a crisp, stapled document. It was a power of attorney form, already filled out. She slid it across the mahogany table, her fingernail tapping on the signature line. The laws are getting so complicated these days. Maggie, she said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweetness. You wouldn't understand the legal jargon. It is better to let us handle the heavy lifting. Just sign here, and we can protect you. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at her. Somewhere deep in the back of my mind, a dormant alarm bell began to ring. It was the same instinct I had honed during 30 years at Orion Vista Freight, where we had mandatory annual training on recognizing vendor fraud and internal theft. The urgency in her voice, the vagueness of the explanation, it all smelled like a scam. I decided to play the role they had already cast me in. I let my hand tremble slightly as I reached for the paper, then pulled it back. I don't have my reading glasses. I stammered, making my voice sound thin and confused. I can't see the lines. Let me take it to my room. I will sign it tomorrow morning when my eyes are fresh. Sabrina's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she nodded. As soon as I was behind the locked door of my bedroom, I did not go to sleep. I used my phone to photograph every single page of the document. Then, fueled by a cold knot of adrenaline, I dug into the old filing box I kept in the back of my closet. I found the deed to my old property in San Verde, a patch of land I had kept for sentimental reasons. I cross-referenced the numbers with the online county clerk records. My heart stopped. There was a second mortgage taken out on the property 3 years ago. The applicant was me, but the income listed was $300,000 a year a lie. Ethan had forged my signature and used fake financial data to leverage the only thing I owned free and clear. The next morning, while Sabrina was at yoga and Ethan was sleeping in, I took a bus to the other side of the city. I walked into a small office building next to a strip mall and found the door marked Harper and Cole Legal Group. Simone Harper looked older than I remembered from her days representing the logistics union, but her eyes were just as sharp. She listened to me for 40 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Maggie, this isn't just bad behavior, Simone said, her voice low and serious. This is textbook financial exploitation of the elderly. If you sign that power of attorney, they will drain you dry before the ink is wet. She advised me to play dead. We drafted a new will that afternoon. We set up an irrevocable trust called the Blue Horizon Trust, designating my grandchildren as the beneficiaries, but locking Ethan and Sabrina out of any direct control. You need eyes on the ground, Simone told me. If this goes to court, it will be your word against theirs. And they are young and polished. You need proof. I spent the next 2 days terrified. I bought 3 small, motion-activated cameras that looked like USB chargers. I plugged one into the kitchen outlet, one in the living room, and one in the hallway. It was legal to record in my own home, Simone had assured me, but it felt like a violation. Yet, every time I looked at Ethan, I felt a wave of nausea. He was ramping up his performance. He would stop me in the hallway, looking deeply concerned. Mum, did you take your heart medication? He would ask loudly, even though I did not have a heart condition. You seem a little out of it today. Maybe you shouldn't drive anymore. Your eyes are getting bad. I realized with horror that he was building a narrative. He was planting seeds for witnesses, for neighbors, maybe even for judges, painting me as a senile woman who could not be trusted with her own life. But the real blow came a week later. I was sitting in Simone's office again when she slid a printed email across her desk. Her team had flagged a query in the probate court system. "I need you to look at this," Simone said. It was a draft application for full financial guardianship. Ethan had filled it out. In the section for the reason, he had written, "Mother is suffering from rapid cognitive decline and is no longer capable of managing her assets." "He hasn't filed it yet," Simone said, her finger resting on the bottom of the page. "Do you know why?" I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. "Because he needs a doctor's signature to certify you are incompetent," she said. "He's just waiting for you to have one bad day, one slip-up, or one public outburst so he can get a doctor to sign this. He is trying to erase you, Maggie." The morning of the incident felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm in the high desert. I was standing at the kitchen island, ostensibly chopping carrots for a stew, but my mind was focused on the small leather suitcase hidden beneath the pantry shelf. Inside, I had packed my birth certificate, the deed to the San Verde land, and the finalized copies of the Blue Horizon Trust documents. Simone had told me to leave by Friday. Today was Wednesday. I was running 2 days ahead of schedule because the way Ethan had looked at me over breakfast, like a butcher eyeing a particularly tough cut of meat, had made my skin crawl. I did not hear the garage door open. I only realized I was not alone when the kitchen door swung open and Sabrina walked in. She was supposed to be at a client lunch. She stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes landing on the open pantry door where I had foolishly left the suitcase unzipped to add one last envelope. The bold lettering on the trust document was visible even from where she stood. Her expression shifted instantly from confusion to a terrifying, cold rage. She dropped her designer purse on the floor and marched toward me. "What is this?" she hissed, snatching the envelope before I could close the bag. She read the title, and her face twisted. "A trust. You are moving the assets into a trust. So this is where the money is going. To some blood-sucking lawyer, it is my money." "Sabrina," I said, my voice shaking but her eyes dry. "I worked 40 years for it. I have the right to decide where it goes." "You are betraying us," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Everything belongs to Ethan. He is your only son. How dare you steal from your own grandchildren to pay for this garbage?" She lunged for the rest of the papers on the counter. Instinct took over. I was not a frail old woman in that moment. I was the girl who had survived the mines. I put my hands up and shoved her back to create distance. It was not a violent hit, just a desperate push for space. Sabrina stumbled backward in her high heels. She hit the granite island with her hip and slid to the floor. It was a minor fall. I saw her catch herself. She was fine. Then we heard heavy footsteps thundering down the stairs. "What is going on?" Ethan yelled, bursting into the kitchen. Sabrina looked up at him, and in a split second, I saw the calculation in her eyes. She grabbed her stomach, curling into a ball. She pushed me. She shrieked, squeezing out fake tears. Oh my God. "Ethan." She threw me against the counter. "She wants to kill your baby." My blood ran cold. There was no baby. We both knew there was no baby. But Ethan did not look for logic. He looked for a target. His face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He did not check on his wife. He charged at me. "You crazy old witch," he roared. "You want to kill my child, Ethan. Listen to me." I tried to say, backing up until my spine hit the refrigerator. "She is lying." "She is not." He did not let me finish. He grabbed my left wrist with a grip that felt like iron pliers. You never loved me. He screamed, spitting saliva into my face. You never cared about me. You only care about your damn money. You want to control everything. He shook me, his fingers digging into my skin so hard I knew there would be bruises. Then, blinded by his own manufactured rage, he twisted. He yanked my arm upward and backward at an unnatural angle. Snap. The sound was dry and loud, like a dead tree branch breaking in a winter forest. It echoed off the tile floors. A white-hot bolt of lightning shot up my arm and exploded in my brain. My knees buckled. I slumped to the floor, gasping for air, unable to scream because the pain had sucked the oxygen right out of my lungs. I retched, dry heaving onto the clean floor. Through the haze of agony, I heard Sabrina's voice. She was on her phone, pacing, her voice trembling with a perfect, practiced fear. 911. Please, help my mother-in-law. She is having a psychotic episode. She attacked me. I am pregnant. My husband had to restrain her, and... oh God. I think she hurt herself. Please hurry. She looked down at me, her eyes dry and cold as stones, and whispered to Ethan. Tell them she slipped. Tell them she was thrashing around. Ethan stood over me, panting, looking at his own hands. He looked terrified. Not for me, but for himself. It was an accident. He muttered to the room, rehearsing his line. She was out of control. I was just trying to stop her. When the paramedics arrived, the performance was seamless. Sabrina was the weeping victim on the sofa. Ethan was the distraught son. I was loaded onto the stretcher. The pain in my arm, a dull, throbbing roar that synced with my heartbeat. As they wheeled me toward the ambulance, the paramedic asked if I wanted my phone. I nodded weakly. He tucked it into my good hand. The doors closed, shutting out the sight of my son and his wife standing in the driveway of the house I paid for. I waited until the siren started to wail. My fingers, clumsy with shock, dialed Simone. Maggie, her voice answered. They did it, I whispered, staring at the roof of the ambulance. He broke my arm. Simone. And then they lied to the police. I took a breath that rattled in my chest. They just gave you the last piece of evidence you need, I said, my voice hardening into something cold and sharp. Do not let them walk out of that hospital as innocent people. Simone Harper arrived at the hospital before the police had even finished taking my statement. She did not walk into the room. She marched, her heels clicking against the linoleum like the strike of a gavel. She carried a thick leather briefcase that looked heavy enough to break a table, and inside it was every receipt, every recording, and every photo I had gathered over the last 6 weeks. Ethan was standing in the hallway, trying to charm a young nurse, but when he saw Simone, his smile vanished like smoke. Inside my room, a tired detective named Vance was trying to steer me toward a compromise. He capped his pen and looked at me with a patronizing expression. Look, Mrs. Doyle, he said, leaning back in the plastic chair. It sounds like a chaotic situation. Mutual combat, maybe. If you admit that you were confused and maybe pushed your daughter-in-law first, we can write this off as a domestic disturbance. You don't want to drag your son through the mud, do you? Before I could answer, the door swung open. Officer? Stop right there, Simone said, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. My client will not be admitting to anything because she is the victim of systematic elder abuse, financial exploitation, and aggravated assault. Ethan and Sabrina hovered in the doorway, looking pale. Sabrina tried to speak up. "She is senile," she cried out, clutching her fake baby bump. "She attacked me." Simone did not even look at her. She placed a laptop on the bedside table and turned the screen toward Detective Vance. "I have here a recording from a camera installed in the kitchen," Simone said calmly. "This was taken 3 days ago." She pressed play. The audio was crisp. It was Sabrina's voice, dripping with venom. "If you do not sign that power of attorney, Maggie, we will make sure you are declared incompetent. We will put you in a home so cheap you will rot in your own filth before anyone changes your sheets." The room went dead silent. The detective sat up straighter. Sabrina made a noise like a strangled cat. "And this," Simone continued, "opening a video file, is from this morning. Watch closely." The video from the top of the refrigerator played. It showed the truth in high definition. It showed Sabrina lunging at me to grab the papers. It showed my defensive shove. It showed Sabrina landing on her hip, perfectly fine, before throwing herself into a theatrical pose. And then it showed Ethan. It showed him storming in, grabbing my arm, and twisting it with deliberate, sickening force. It was not a struggle. It was torture. Detective Vance watched the video twice. His face hardened. He stood up and walked to the door, placing a hand on his holster. "Ethan Doyle, Sabrina Doyle," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "I need you both to step into the hallway. Now. We are looking at aggravated assault causing bodily injury and filing a false police report." Ethan started to sweat, beads of perspiration forming on his forehead. "Wait. It was an accident. She is my mother." "That video didn't look like an accident." "Son," the detective said. While the police cornered them in the corridor, Simone was already on her phone, her voice efficient and ruthless. "Yes. This is an emergency request," she said into the receiver. "I am emailing the court order now. I want all accounts under the name Ethan Doyle that are connected to the Blue Horizon Trust or Margaret Doyle frozen immediately. Block the pending real estate transfer on the Silver Mesa property. Nothing moves. Not 1 cent." I lay back against the pillows, the pain in my arms still sharp. But my mind was clearer than it had been in years. I looked at the detective when he came back in. "It wasn't just today," I told him, my voice steady. "They hid my blood pressure medication last week. They told me I forgot to take it, but I found the bottle in the trash. They were trying to make me dizzy, trying to make me fall so they could get a doctor to sign their papers." The detective wrote it all down, his pen moving fast. Simone walked over to the door, where Ethan was trying to plead with an officer. She stood 5 feet 2 inches, but she looked like a giant. "Mr. Doyle," she said, handing him a folded paper. "This is a temporary restraining order granted by the judge 40 minutes ago. You are not to come within 500 feet of this hospital or your mother. All communication goes through me. If you text her, call her, or send a carrier pigeon, you will be arrested for violating a court order." Ethan looked at me through the gap in the door, his eyes wide with shock. He had never seen me fight back. He thought I was just a resource, a bank account with a pulse. "Mum," he whispered, his voice cracking. I looked away. Simone placed a clipboard on my lap. It was the document giving her full, durable power of attorney to handle every aspect of the lawsuit and my estate. I took the pen in my right hand. My signature was shaky, but it was legible. "Do it," I said to Simone. For the first time in my life, I was using the law to protect myself, not to make excuses for the people I loved. I watched the ink dry, and I felt a strange, cold sense of freedom. They had broken my bone, but they had fixed my spine. Simone did not come alone the next morning. She brought a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and left out in the rain for a few decades. His name was Victor Hale, a former homicide detective turned private investigator, and he placed a stack of folders on my hospital tray table with a heavy thud that made the plastic water pitcher rattle. "We have been busy, Maggie," Simone said, pulling up a chair. "Victor has pulled the financial entrails of your son and daughter-in-law. It is worse than we thought." Victor opened the first folder without a word. It was a spreadsheet of transactions from the joint accounts I had foolishly co-signed. I saw withdrawals for $5,000, $3,000, and one massive withdrawal for $12,000. "They weren't investing in a startup," Victor said, his voice gravelly and low. "They were gambling. Most of this was withdrawn at casinos in Nevada. But the big purchase, that was a down payment on a luxury sports car. Ethan told me he leased a car for client meetings," I said, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. "He didn't lease it for himself," Victor corrected. "He bought it for a woman named Chloe. She is listed as his business partner on paper, but in reality, she is his mistress. They have been seeing each other for 18 months. I felt the bile rise in my throat. My son was not just stealing from me. He was using my life savings to fund a double life." Victor slid a printed screenshot of a text message conversation across the table. It was between Ethan and this Chloe. "Don't worry, babe," Ethan had written. "The old lady is losing it. Once she is officially declared incompetent, I get power of attorney. Then the assets are ours. I will clear out her old life and we can finally breathe." I closed my eyes. He was talking about me like I was a stain he needed to scrub off the floor. "It gets darker," Simone said softly. "Sabrina has her own secrets." She opened the second folder. It detailed transfers going from our household account to a man named Lucas Trent. "That is her brother?" I whispered. She told me he was a financial advisor. "He is a con artist with a rap sheet for insurance fraud," Victor said bluntly. "Sabrina has been funneling him your money. But what we found in their emails is disturbing. They were discussing a facility for you, a place called Shady Creek in the next state over." Victor tapped a printed email chain. Sabrina had written to Lucas, "We need a place that is discreet. Somewhere the staff knows how to keep patients silent if they complain too much. Once she is in, I don't want her calling lawyers." My blood ran cold. They were not just planning to take my money. They were planning to imprison me in a warehouse for the unwanted, ensuring I could never speak up again. "We also found a witness," Simone added. "Your neighbor, May Jenkins. She gave a sworn statement yesterday. She heard Ethan shouting at you in the driveway 2 weeks ago. I remembered that day. I had refused to sign a check for a vacation they wanted. May heard him clearly." Simone said. She heard him say, "If you keep being stubborn, I will sign you into a nursing home and forget you ever existed." That establishes premeditation. Maggie. This is not a family dispute anymore. This is conspiracy, fraud, and kidnapping in the making. I looked at the mountain of paper. It was an autopsy of my relationship with my son. Every page was a cut, every number a betrayal. "There is one more thing," Victor said, pulling a single sheet from the bottom of the stack. "You invested in a small tech supply company 20 years ago. Right. Yes. I nodded. Just a few $1,000s. I forgot about it. It wasn't a few thousand anymore. Victor said. The company was acquired last year. Your shares were worth $45,000. Ethan forged your signature on a transfer deed 6 months ago. He sold them and deposited the check into a private account he hid from Sabrina. The room spun slightly. He had stolen from me, cheated on his wife, and plotted to lock me away. Simone leaned forward, placing her hand over my trembling one. Maggie, listen to me, she said, her voice fierce. With this file, we have them. This is grand larceny, forgery, and elder abuse. We can put them in prison for 10 to 15 years. She paused, letting the weight of the sentence hang in the air. Or, she continued, her eyes locking onto mine. We can offer them a choice. They return every single penny they stole, liquidate their assets, and sign away any future claim to your estate. Or we hand this file to the district attorney. I looked at the broken arm resting in the sling. I looked at the evidence of the son I had sacrificed everything for. Do it, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Corner them. The hearing for the restraining order was held in a small, sterile courtroom that smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. Ethan walked in, wearing a suit I had paid for 3 years ago, looking down at his polished shoes. He had shaved his beard and combed his hair to the side, trying to look like the choir boy he used to be. Sabrina sat beside him, wearing no makeup and a plain grey cardigan, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue every time the judge looked her way. They looked at me not with anger, but with the blank, glassy stares of strangers. Ethan's lawyer, a young man with too much gel in his hair, stood up and adjusted his tie. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth. This is a tragic misunderstanding. My client's mother has a history of instability since her retirement. We believe she is suffering from severe depression and paranoia. The incident in the kitchen was a result of her confusion. Ethan was merely trying to keep her from hurting herself. I gripped the edge of the table with my good hand. Objection, Simone said, standing up without even looking at her notes. We have a psychiatric evaluation conducted yesterday by Dr. Evans, a court-appointed specialist. It confirms that Margaret Doyle is fully cognizant, mentally sharp, and suffering from absolutely no cognitive decline. She walked to the bench and handed the file to the judge. Then she turned to the clerk. Please play Exhibit A. The video from the kitchen filled the screens mounted on the walls. The sound was even worse in the quiet courtroom. Sabrina's screeching accusations, Ethan's roar of rage, and then the snap. It echoed through the room like a gunshot. I saw the judge flinch. He looked from the screen to Ethan, his expression shifting from neutral to pure disgust. Mr. Doyle, the judge said, his voice low and dangerous. That did not look like you were helping your mother. That looked like you were trying to dismantle her. He banged his gavel. The restraining order is extended for 1 year. Furthermore, I am granting the request to freeze all assets pending the criminal investigation. Ethan jumped up, his face turning that terrifying shade of purple again. You can't do that, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the judge. That is my money. She is stealing my inheritance. This is bullshit. The word hung in the air. The good son mask had slipped, and everyone saw the monster underneath. Later that night, I sat in the temporary apartment Simone had rented for me. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from a friend. Ethan had posted a long, rambling essay on social media. "It breaks my heart to see my mother being manipulated by predatory lawyers," he wrote. "She is confused and hurting the people who love her most. We just want her to come home and get the help she needs. We forgive her." The comments were a battlefield. Some strangers called me a senile old woman. Others called him a saint. I wanted to scream, but I put the phone down. Then, a different call came through. It was a video call from a username I did not recognize. I answered it, and Leo's face filled the screen. He was hiding in his closet, holding the tablet close to his face. "Grandma," he whispered. "Leo, honey?" I said, my heart breaking. "Are you okay? Dad says you aren't coming home because you hate us," he said, his eyes filling with tears. "He says you want to take all our money and give it to the police. Is that true?" I had to bite my lips so hard I tasted blood. "No, baby," I said softly. "I love you more than anything. Adults make messes sometimes, and we have to clean them up. I am just cleaning up a mess. I will see you soon. I promise." The screen went black as he hung up. I sat there in the dark, shaking. Simone walked in from the kitchen with a cup of tea. "We are shifting gears," she said. "We are not just defending you anymore. We are filing a civil suit tomorrow. We are asking the court to validate the Blue Horizon Trust immediately. It will permanently strip Ethan and Sabrina of any claim to your assets." "Do it," I said. "There is one more thing," Simone said, sitting down. "Sabrina called me an hour ago. She wants a deal." I looked at her, surprised. "She knows the ship is sinking," Simone explained. "She offered to testify that Ethan was the mastermind behind the financial fraud. She claims she was just following orders. She wants immunity. She is lying." I said, "She was the one who printed the papers." "I know," Simone said with a shark-like grin. "I told her we are not interested in her story unless she gives us everything. I want the emails about the nursing home. I want the texts with her brother. I told her if she hands over the proof that they planned to imprison you, I will recommend a lighter sentence to the district attorney. She is thinking about it." I looked out the window at the city lights of Redstone City. I felt heavy, like I was carrying stones in my pockets. "Am I a bad mother?" "Simone," I asked quietly. "I am sending my son to prison. I am destroying his life." Simone did not answer immediately. She let the silence stretch out. "He broke your arm, Maggie," she said finally. "And he was planning to lock you in a room until you died so he could buy a sports car. You aren't destroying his life. You are just refusing to let him end yours." I nodded slowly. She was right. I was not the villain in this story. I was just the survivor who finally decided to fight back. The courtroom was packed to the rafters. The local press had descended on the case like vultures, drawn by the sensational headline of a son breaking his mother's arm for money. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Simone, my arm finally free of the cast, but scarred and stiff. Across the aisle, Ethan sat with his lawyer, looking small and pale. Sabrina was not beside him. She was sitting in the witness box. The trial moved with the speed of a guillotine blade. Simone and the prosecutor laid out the timeline like a map of a war zone. They showed the forged documents, the secret bank accounts, and the emails planning my imprisonment in a nursing home. But the room truly fell silent when Sabrina began to speak. She had taken the plea deal. "Ethan told me we had to accelerate the timeline," Sabrina said, her voice shaking, but her eyes dry. He said, He said if we could prove she was physically unstable, the doctors would sign the competency papers faster. He didn't just twist her arm. He planned it. He said a broken bone heals, but a diagnosis lasts forever. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Ethan stared at his wife with pure hatred, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. Ethan's lawyer tried to salvage the wreckage. He turned his attention to me, trying to paint me as the architect of my son's flaws. "Mrs. Doyle," he asked, pacing in front of me. "Is it true that you worked 80 hours a week when Ethan was a child? Is it true you often left him with neighbors? Would you say you prioritized money over your son's emotional needs?" I looked him dead in the eye. "I prioritized his survival," I answered, my voice steady. "I worked those hours so he would never know what it felt like to be hungry. Maybe I was not there to tuck him in every night. But that is not an excuse for him to break my arm and steal my life savings." The lawyer retreated, but Simone was not finished. She stood up, holding a small USB drive. "Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence. This was recovered from a cloud backup of Mr. Lucas Trent's phone. It is a recording of a phone call between the defendant and Mr. Trent, dated 2 nights before the assault." The judge nodded. Simone pressed play. The speakers crackled, and then Ethan's voice filled the room. He sounded drunk, his words slurring but unmistakable. "It is easy, man. I give her a little shove. Maybe she falls down the stairs. Maybe she trips in the kitchen. Just a little snap. Once she is in the hospital, pumped full of meds, we tell everyone she is dangerous to herself. Then the house is mine." Ethan laughed on the recording. It was a cold, cruel sound. In the courtroom, Ethan stood up, knocking his chair over. He looked wild, cornered, and stripped of every lie he had ever told. "I deserve it," he screamed at me. His face twisted. "I deserve every penny you were never there. You think paying for college makes up for being gone. You owe me this. You owe me a life." The judge banged his gavel so hard I thought the handle would snap. "Sit down, Mr. Doyle. One more outburst, and I will hold you in contempt." But the damage was done. The jury had seen the truth. The deliberation took less than 2 hours. The judge read the verdict with a voice like iron. Ethan was found guilty of aggravated assault on an elderly person, conspiracy to commit fraud, and financial exploitation. Sabrina and Lucas received lesser sentences with heavy probation and restitution orders due to their cooperation. But their reputations were incinerated. Furthermore, the judge continued, looking over his spectacles at Ethan. "The court validates the Blue Horizon Trust. The defendant is hereby stripped of all claims to Margaret Doyle's estate. You will pay restitution in the amount of $340,000. A permanent restraining order is granted. You are to have no contact with the victim for 10 years. Ethan slumped forward, putting his head in his hands. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp. I watched as 2 bailiffs led Ethan toward the transport van. He was handcuffed. He turned his head and looked at me one last time. There was no love in his eyes, only panic and a deep, festering hate. I did not look away. I stood beside Simone, my back straight, my scar aching in the cold wind. A reporter with a microphone thrust himself toward me. "Mrs. Doyle. Mrs. Doyle. Do you regret sending your own son to prison?" I paused. I looked at the reporter, then at the van driving away with my only child. "I did not send him to prison," I said. my voice clear enough for the cameras to catch every syllable. He drove himself there the day he decided he loved my money more than he loved me. I just called my lawyer, and I told her not to let them walk out of here with one more thing that belongs to me. I turned my back on the cameras and walked away, a small figure casting a long shadow, finally free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below sharing your city or country and your thoughts on the verdict. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button so more people can hear our stories.